Consider this. Just a century ago, we were just beginning to fly, and the vast majority of Americans lived in rural communities. Just 75 years ago, the Manhattan Project was created, and the world's first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction occurred at the University of Chicago. 50 years ago, over 100 American cities saw rioting due to large part to increased police brutality against black Americans. 20 years ago, the Google brand, the name was invented, and just 10 years ago, the first iPhone came out. For most of human history, the pace of change for the average person was incredibly slow. It was slow and deliberate. And so is it any wonder that people today struggle to make sense of all the change that is going on in the world? When everything that we have been taught since birth comes into question, when the tried and true stories of the past, when they stand in stark contrast to the facts of our experience, when life ceases to fit into the boxes we use to define and delineate, how do we respond? Well, as many people do, we can try to force the world to fit into those well-defined little boxes. Those boxes that we call religion, or race, or politics. But more often than not, because of the rate of change, that just leads to cognitive dissonance. And we are left only with fear, anger, and bitterness to shield us from the truth of the world. Another option is to build a bigger box. Oh, look at our bigger box. Let's take pride in our tolerant attitudes, ignoring that our tolerance still has clear boundaries, as all boxes must. Again, forcing us to shield ourselves with fear, anger, and bitterness when that cognitive dissonance when it's pointed out that we are not nearly as inclusive and tolerant as we like to think. Another option, perhaps, is to accept that all those boxes, all of mine, all of yours, everybody's boxes are mere constructs built to help us make sense of this very complex and messy world. Do you know what question Rene Descartes was trying to answer when he declared, "I think, therefore I am"? You know what he was trying to solve? Well, essentially, he wanted to know what he could truly know beyond a shadow of a doubt. He wrote, "Seeing that our senses sometimes deceive us, I was willing to suppose that there existed nothing really such as they presented to us. And because some men err in reasoning, even on the simplest matters of geometry, I, convinced that I was open to error as any other, rejected as false all the reasonings I had hitherto taken for demonstrations." So he concluded, finally, that the observation of our own doubts, our own thoughts, that observation of our own awareness was proof of the existence of the mind. Because I can see myself thinking, I know that I am. Consider that for a moment. He is saying that the awareness of our doubts, awareness of our thoughts, awareness of our own limitations is the one objective truth we can truly know. He wrote, "Whilst I thus wished to think that all was false, it was absolutely necessary that I, who thus thought, should be something. And as I observed that this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain and of such evidence that no ground of doubt, however extravagant, could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it, I concluded that I might without scruple accept it as the first principle of the philosophy of which I was in search." Another way of saying that, we do not describe the world we see the world we can describe. We are a subject. And the world comes to us as it is. And sometimes we see things and sometimes we don't. Recently, I've seen something, or something has come into my awareness. It's not new. It's a phrase that's new to me. It's just a word. But it coincides closely with what I'm thinking here and what I've been thinking about at large and what I've been writing about. And my first encounter of it came in the title of a recent Yes magazine post. It was entitled, "This November, Try Something New, Decolonize Your Mind," written by Marionette Pember. And Pember writes, "To decolonize is not only an act of humility and acceptance, it requires the courage to take responsibility for our role in this great, relentless process that is our life on earth. In decolonizing our minds, we embrace the notion that we are a part of rather than apart from the earth." Now, my second point of contact with the word came from the author Andrew Harvey. It was posted on his Facebook page to introduce his new book, Savage Grace, which I look forward to reading. So in the post it was written, "What is certain is that without a stringent decolonization and detoxification from the values of the dominant culture, and without rigorous warrior midwife training and practice, the rebel is likely to be destroyed from within as well as from without." So clearly the word is decolonize that came into my awareness. As I said, it's not a new word, been at least around since the 80s, the idea, initially in Africa, encouraging Africans to decolonize their minds, to not follow suit of their colonizers. But what I like about these two references to the word decolonize is that we are called both to decolonize our mind and replace it with a new way of being in the world. It's not enough to just decolonize, because then what are we left with?
Nothing.
Exactly, nothing. See, anybody who's gone to university in the last 50 years, they've been exposed to what is called postmodern thought. And postmodern thought has focused all its energy on deconstructing everything that preceded it. It's deconstructs modern ideas and pre-modern and religion and science. It likes to just deconstruct, analyze, deconstruct, question everything. But then it offers nothing to replace, nothing to fill in the gaps that we are left with when we question and deconstruct everything. Philosopher Ken Wilber, he wrote this about postmodern thought. He says, in short, postmodern, or pluralism, believes that it is universally true that there are no universal truths. It believes that its view is superior, but also believes that there are no superior views anywhere. This view ranks ranking as being bad, judges judging as being oppressive, gives a very big picture about why big pictures are not possible, claims it universally true that there are no universal truths, places hierarchies on the lowest level of its particular hierarchy, and claims its view is superior in a world where nothing is supposed to be superior. Now, I find Wilber's description of postmodernism very appropriate because I remember when I was there, I remember thinking those thoughts. Oh, ranking is bad, judging is bad, hierarchies are bad. He writes that this is called performative contradiction, because you yourself are doing what you claim you cannot or should not do. It is, frankly, performative contradictions. They're common in every religion, philosophy, political, construct. And they exist, they exist because we are human. Because we are finite beings trying to respond to an infinitely complex reality. And so, our answers always fall short of the mark. See, where I think postmodernism went awry, where most people go awry in their own thinking, is the lack of self-reflection. We forget that our opinion is mere opinion, and so is naturally limited in perspective. Postmodernism made two serious mistakes, I think. Well, let's look at this. Let's look at this. So I saw this on the right, this on Facebook the other day. It says, billions of people through the whole history of mankind thought that their religion was the correct one. What makes you different from them? And it's a good question. Every religion claims to be the true religion. But there's another side of that same observation, that billions of people throughout the whole of history have felt it important to express their and expand their relationship with divinity in one form or another. Is it possible that I am missing something here? There's a universality to religion that begs the question, if I'm not experiencing it, maybe that's me. Doesn't mean it's not real. Postmodernism was so focused on critiquing traditional and modern Western culture, coming up with questions like this, but it never bothered to question its own assumptions. The old, check the log in your own eye before you go after the sawdust in my eye fallacy. And the second problem was that it was focused on critiquing traditional and modern Western culture, and it didn't develop that viable replacement. The old everybody's wrong if nobody's right fallacy. Or everybody is right if nobody's wrong. You can go either way. Because the result of postmodern thought is a stifling moral relativism. That being said, and before I go on, I do want to make the point that much of the critique of Western culture done by postmodernism was very much on point and very much needed. So we should not dismiss the lessons of postmodernism out of hand. Because it wasn't perfect, we shouldn't throw it all out. What were the lessons? So the trick is to recognize that it's all made up. All of our religions, all of our philosophies, all of our politics, it's all just made up. And we can recognize that and claim that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it is. I mean, if Descartes has anything to say, if there's only one thing we can truly know for sure is our own existence, and everything else we have to doubt and question, then everything else we've just created ourselves. Everything is opinion. And I say, let's have our opinions. Let them be strong. Let them serve to guide us through our life. But let us also hold on to them loosely. Let us hold on to them loosely with an open hand. For when we grasp them, they become rigid. We become possessive. We feel we must defend them. So let our opinions be free. Let us remember that which we believe, even our most cherished beliefs, while they may be true to our experience, to our perspective, the same facts viewed from another perspective may lead to different conclusions. As Descartes pointed out, there's only one thing we can know for sure. It's our own being. And when we live in awareness of that, when we are aligned with our deepest selves, our opinions, they don't go away. Our belief systems, our relationships, they don't go away. But they are put in a proper perspective. When we are in alignment with our deepest selves, then it is easier to identify and relate to the deepest selves of everyone else. Even those whose opinions we stand in direct opposition. Even those who hate us because we hold certain opinions. So living in this awareness, we learn that winning an argument, being right, is far less important than finding common ground with those on the other side of the table, or the aisle, or the argument, or the other side of whatever it is that we are on our side of. It's all about building bridges instead of walls, and learning to love without compromising our deepest truths. And what is that deepest truth? Besides, I think, therefore I am. Well, in Yes Magazine article, about decolonizing our mind, Pember writes, "The understanding that humans are merely one part of a huge complex of interconnected creatures is the basic tenet of most native cosmologies. In recognizing this tenet, we can't help but love and hold the earth and ourselves sacred." Pember writes from the Ojibwe perspective. And when I read her words here, I can't help but recognize our own first and seventh principles in there. Maybe better said, frankly. The inherent worth and dignity of all people and respect for the interdependent web of existence. That is the deepest truth. Because that's what we connect with when we get rid of all of our opinions, all of our thoughts, and find that I amness that is at our core. Because the being at the center of our own core, that which exists beyond any doubt, it's the same in all beings. It is the spirit of life. And Pember points out in her article that when the missionaries arrived to convert the Ojibwe people, they complained in their reports, the missionaries did, that the Ojibwe spent too much time in idle visiting, leaving productive tasks undone. How very Protestant of them. And she points out that although unrecognized and appreciated by the missionaries, the Ojibwe were engaged in important work. These spans of unstructured, shared time allowed people to engage spiritually and grow to understand needs and formulate paths forward. Ojibwe know and value the power of visiting, unencumbered by agenda points and outcomes. We trust that through prayer and community that we can determine how to honor and care for the environment, each other, and ourselves. And she points out we can do this easily. You don't need to buy anything. There's no ceremony, no name change, no travel, no acquisition of a power animal, funding, community outreach, creation of a committee, program, or agency is required. None of that is required. All it takes, as she points out, is spending time with each other without agenda or purpose to gather and celebrate the fact of our existence. And she says, why not spend time visiting others, especially those whose ethnically and social class differs from your own? Eat, drink, coffee, let silence fall, she says, and wait to find out what needs to be done. At first, it might be just being human together. Decolonization needs these roots to begin. We generally think that standing on the side of love within Unitarian Universalism means taking our banner to the streets and making a big show of a protest and at rallies. But I think standing on the side of love is more than just that. It's a way of life. And I think it's all about the small things, like listening to understand rather than listening to respond. It's about our ability to see things from a different perspective once in a while. It means finding common ground, even with that self-righteous and belligerent relative sitting next to you at the holiday dinner table. Because you know what? Those are the same words that person used to describe you. Because you're both dead set on being right all the time. I'm hearing laughing of recognition, maybe? If we are not functionally and actually different in this world, if we aren't actually trying to create a new way of being as opposed to just another way of doing things the old way, if we aren't actually trying to create something new, then are we really any help? what these authors call decolonizing the mind, I call living indigenously. Living like we belong here, like we belong together. And that means especially those who are on the other side of our arguments. It's not easy, this standing on the side of love thing. The easy part is taking the banner and go down to the streets. The hard part, the challenging part, but the most necessary part is taking the idea into our hearts and changing the world one person at a time, beginning with ourselves, letting ourselves be changed. Because that's where it begins. Because if we aren't willing to do that, if we aren't willing to be changed, then let's not call ourselves open, progressive, open-minded, free thinkers. Because that's what a free thinker is one who's willing to change their opinion on something. This holiday season, we will have opportunities, many opportunities, I hope, to interact with people we wouldn't normally interact with. Maybe at the airport, on an airplane, it may be at a holiday dinner, it may be anywhere. It's an opportunity. I dare you. I triple dog dare you to give it a try. Sit down with somebody you totally disagree with and hear their perspective without trying to correct them, change their mind. Just try to understand how they got from A to B. See if you can do it. I dare you. So be it. Amen. Blessed be.